Lately, I've barely been able to keep my head above water financially. For the past 2 years, I've moved around chasing job listings and low rent. I've sank low enough to accept a door-to-door sales job. It had something to do with a water filter. I doubted the services were legit, but I got paid per sale. After 3 days of getting the door slammed in my face, I got desperate enough to head into a neighborhood with longer lawns and cracks in the sidewalk. I just needed one more sale, and I swore I would quit this awful job. The sun had started to set by the time I arrived at the last house on the block. I considered not bothering with it. One of the front windows was broken, with nothing but cardboard keeping the insects out. I regret ever going up the wooden front steps to knock on the door. A few seconds of silence passed after my short knocks. I had turned to leave when the door opened a crack. Inside was too dark to see the man's face fully. I was so surprised someone actually answered, I fumbled with the papers in my hands. "What are you selling?" the man asked in a deep voice. "I'm with the Clearwater's filtration systems. If I could have a moment of your time, I would like to display how dirty your tap water is," I said, my voice as tired as I felt from being on my feet all day. The man didn't move for a few seconds. He kept looking over me, trying to see if I was a threat. Finally, he opened the door the rest of the way to let me inside. I paused, debating on how much I needed this sale. The fact I hadn't had a meal in 2 days was the factor that made me follow the owner of the house. Inside was dark and smelled musty. I expected it to be dirty, but there wasn't much inside. The old floorboards creaked as he led me to the kitchen. The room was almost bare. A table with 2 chairs took up most of the space. There was a full knife block, a microwave, and a fridge. No dishwasher. No plates or mugs. Not even any trash. "May I have a cup of water to test?" I asked. My stomach turned. My body knew something was wrong before my brain caught up. The man was taller than me and well-built. He looked well-fed compared to my thinner frame. I wasn't always like this. Years ago, I was in shape, but not having reliable meals hit me hard. By the time I clued into my situation, it was far too late. I had already walked into a trap. Instead of getting me a glass of water, the man took a step closer to me. I raised my clipboard as if it would protect me. He took me out with a single punch to the face. My body hit the ground hard, my nose bleeding. Panic started to set in. I shook my head, trying to clear my racing thoughts. I cursed the idea that I could have taken this guy in a fight a year ago, and just how much I let myself go. His hands fell on me, causing me to struggle. I yelled as I kicked at his legs. With some effort, he got me pinned down to the floor. He painfully pulled my arms behind my back. My wrists were held together with one hand as he used the other to slam my head into the ground, hard enough to make my vision go black. In the few seconds I was out, he put a zip tie painfully around my wrists. I felt him lifting my body to my feet. I needed to do something. I jerked back out of his grasp to land hard against the counter. The knife block fell, causing a few of the blades to slide out. I grabbed the handle of one with my bound hands. I had a weapon, but no way to use it. A knock at the door made us both freeze. I almost screamed for help. A barrel of a gun pointing directly at my face made my mouth close. I let him force me into a chair, my hand still gripping the knife he hadn't noticed. The man didn't need to say anything. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. I watched as he walked out of the room, towards the door and to a new victim. I heard muffled words as I frantically got to work cutting at the zip tie. I sliced open my fingers trying to use the knife. I felt the zip tie snag just as my attacker came back inside the room with someone new. I froze again. If I made a run for it, I would get shot. I needed to wait for the right moment to get the jump on this man, praying the element of surprise would beat his trigger finger. The new person had wavy black hair and a bright, dimpled smile on his face. His pressed white shirt and sharp dress pants looked out of place in a house like this. He held some booklets in his hand. My face dropped when I read the words, "The Watchtower," on the front. This poor guy was just trying to spread the good word, only to get caught up with all this. His smile faltered when he saw my face. His eyes followed the blood from my nose to my now stained shirt. "Is this a bad time? I can come back later." The newcomer spoke in a softer tone that matched his appearance. His face held a nervous smile. The man who had let him inside said nothing. When the newcomer moved to step away, he was caught in a flash. I winced at the sound of him hitting the table hard. The booklet spilled to the floor as the larger man pinned him down. "Please, I haven't seen anything. I won't..." He started begging, but got cut off. Just like myself, he had his wrists zip-tied together. When that was done, he was forced into the chair on the other end of the table, scared as hell. His entire body shook. I didn't blame him. My heart raced as I carefully waited for the right time to act. "I can't believe how lucky I am. 2 products just knocked on my door. Here I thought I was only shipping 1 today. Now behave. You're worth more alive." Our kidnapper spoke as he ran a hand over his bald head. I saw the gun in the back of his waistband. I judged the distance between us. Would I have enough time to reach him before he pulled his gun? Or should I wait until he got closer? I didn't have the chance to think through my plan. The stress of the situation was too much for the other man. He bolted upwards, trying to escape. There was a quick struggle that ended in a single gunshot. I stared in horror as the body hit the floor. A pristine white shirt slowly started turning red with blood. I began to feel sick. My stomach turned over the simple fact that if I had acted sooner, this wouldn't have happened. I had a knife in my hand, and yet a man was now bleeding out on the floor in front of me. "Like I said, you're worth more alive." The deep voice snapped me from my shock. Stepping over the body, the attacker took the 2 steps to my chair. The still hot muzzle of the gun was pressed to my cheek. I got dizzy from fear. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the still hidden knife. "I'll make you a deal. Call 2 people over here and I'll let you go free," he offered as he brought his face closer to mine. I smelled his terrible breath. I started to pull my head away, but he grabbed a fistful of short hair to keep me still. I stammered. I was going to tell the truth. Then I truly didn't have anyone in my life I could call. But even if I did, he would just shoot them. And for what purpose? Who would pay for dead bodies? Wasn't this all too risky? In the back of my mind, I knew the answer. One so gruesome, I didn't dare consider it until the black-haired man on the floor moved. His eyes met mine. Then his mouth formed a smile that made my body turn cold. "Oh, come on, no one? Handsome guy like yourself must have a girlfriend. What about a relative or 2 you don't like?" the man said in a mocking voice. I wasn't fully listening to him. As he spoke, the person I was positive had been shot dead started to silently move. The kidnapper's face was so focused on mine that he didn't notice what was happening right behind him. "Turn around," I hissed. "I'm not falling for that," he replied, his face dropping in anger. I felt his hand start looking through my pockets for my phone. I shook my head, pleading for this man to just look over his shoulder. I no longer needed the knife for him, and it would be best to save it for what came next. "Turn the hell around," I snapped again. "There's nothing," he yelled as he finally listened to my warning. He moved to be face to face with the man he'd just shot. I watched in disbelief as the thing I assumed to be a person got on all fours to climb up the table, not making a sound. It easily scaled the wall to stand on the ceiling as if that was normal. A wide, dimpled smile appeared on his face when the bald man finally saw what he'd invited into his house. To his credit, the man raised the gun faster than expected. His wrist was caught and snapped in one fluid motion. His cry of pain was cut short. He was swiftly tossed across the room, denting the cheap drywall on the other side. I caught the eyes of the monster before me. He gave me a wink before jumping down from the ceiling. "Sit tight," he said in a gentle voice I didn't trust. I needed to run. If this monster was focused on the other man, I had a chance to get away. I looked down at the blood-stained floor, also covered in religious pamphlets. WWJD had been written across the top of one of them. My face twitched into an annoyed smile for a second. I hated what I had gotten myself into. I watched as the bald man got hauled back to his feet. His wrist was bruised and swollen, his head bleeding from going through the drywall. His body was forced into a chair by the strength of the false Jehovah's Witness. The chair was spun around so they were face to face. I gripped the knife tighter, waiting for whatever horrors I may see. "You were saying we were products. Who's your buyer? Is Mr. Shark or someone else?" The dark-haired man asked in a forced, kind voice. He pinned down the other man's wrist to the chair. When that didn't fully work, he forced a knee into his stomach. "Fuck you." If the seller ratted out his buyer, he would be placing a target on his own back. If he didn't give up the information now, he would be tortured. Spilling what he knew would save him a great deal of pain, but his pride wouldn't allow it. For a moment, I thought they were at a stalemate. But monsters have a way of making people talk. A small tube with a point at the end came out of the dark-haired man's mouth. I jumped when it shot out directly into the corner of the bald man's eye. He let out a cut-off scream. Then his body froze in place. When the tube slid out, only a small amount of blood trickled down his cheek. I saw the sheer terror in his frozen expression. Whatever this creature had done, it made it impossible for him to fight back. "We could have done this the easy way. Actually, so far you've made my job really easy by letting me inside. Your greed made you take risks. Your gun gave you confidence. Such a shame you won't be able to learn from your mistakes." I expected this monster to sound cruel, but he used the same voice as he did when he first walked into the room. The fact he sounded so normal made my skin crawl. He raised both hands beside the man's bald head. His index finger suddenly transformed into sharp claws that reminded me of insect legs. He placed the tip of a finger on the back of the man's head, slowly tracing a circle that connected in the front. If I had eaten recently, I would have thrown up. At the sight of the top of this person's head being cleanly lifted off, showing an exposed brain slowly pulsing. If I was a stronger person, I would have attacked the creature while it was distracted. Instead, I shut my eyes tight when the face of the monster in front of me changed. It went from a dimpled smile to a face opening in 4 segments. I didn't get a good enough look at it to see just how terrible this monster really was, but I heard some of it. The awful noises of a terrible mouth gorging on a gruesome meal. I didn't know how long I kept my eyes closed. It could have been minutes or an hour. There was a chance that, because I wasn't a target, this creature might let me leave unharmed. I should have begged for my life to get that slim chance of walking away. Instead, I did something stupid. I decided the world didn't need a monster like this one, and I needed to do something about it. I felt a hand fall on my shoulder. In a flash, I brought the knife down into this creature's neck. His face returned to normal. An offended expression appeared on his face. "Ow," he said, without any pain in his voice. At least I caught him slightly off guard. I stood up, grabbing his hand. He was confused enough to not shake out of my grasp, to let me do what I wanted. A burning sensation came from our hands. It jolted him enough to toss me into the counter, but I expected that. I was now within reach of the knives, and the only weapon in the room. If I went for them to start with, he would have stopped me. I needed to make him push me over there. My vision became blurry from stress and an empty stomach. I forced myself to move. In a second, he covered the distance between us. My goal was to cut off his head. Most creatures couldn't live after being decapitated. The knives were good enough to cut through bone, but I needed to put extra power into them. Power my weak body didn't have. Within seconds, my attack failed. I'd gotten a few more knives into his body, but he had me by the throat. My vision fading and my body weak. I saw his face open, ready for another meal. A loud thump from upstairs made him pause. His face returned to a human one. His grip loosened enough for me to breathe, but not escape. "He said 3 products, right? Let's go see who the third person is," the monster said, his dimpled smile returning. I didn't have the strength to fight him. I struggled in vain as he dragged me up the stairs to the bedroom where the noise came from. Again, I was tossed aside as he walked over to the shaking closet door. My knees buckled as I stood up. I needed to find a weapon, anything to stop him. I refused to give this monster one more meal. My heart dropped when small feet rushed out of the closet when the door opened. A child, no more than 4, attached themselves to the man's leg, crying for their father. My mouth became dry as he reached down to pick the child up, looking over the dirty, tear-stained face. I had to do something. As I looked around the empty room for something useful, something unthinkable happened. The poor child wrapped small arms around the man's neck and started to sob. Carefully, he raised his hands to better support the tiny body. His head slowly turned to let his eyes meet mine. My mouth fell slightly open at his expression. I swear I saw stars in his eyes. At first, I assumed his favorite meal was tender children's flesh, but it dawned on me that maybe that wasn't the case. "It's so cute." The tension in my body drained after those words. I fell to the floor, exhausted in more ways than one. "If you try to hurt that kid, I'll kill you," I warned, even though I knew that wouldn't happen. "Go find some soap. We'll get this thing washed up and I'll explain a few things," he offered. I wasn't expecting that. I refused to leave him alone with the child, though. Thankfully, we found some dish soap in the bathroom. It would be good enough. I watched as the same creature who had a moment before eaten a man's brains from his skull gently washed off the poor boy's face and arms. Since we didn't have any clean clothing, he just washed any exposed skin. The kindness was enough to soothe the boy. The moment he was dried off, he fell asleep in the man's arms. I offered to hold the boy, but got a scowl in response. Instead, I was handed a phone with the instructions to call the only number in the contacts list. A woman answered, and as instructed, I requested that she show up at our address. "I take it you dealt with supernatural creatures before," he said after the phone call. I nodded, but didn't tell him anything else. "You pulled a bit of magic from my hand. Most humans can't do that. If you took better care of yourself, you might have given me some trouble. You should leave, before my handler gets here." Again, I stayed silent on my history with creatures. I wanted to focus on who he was and what he was doing here. "I don't fully trust you won't eat the kid the moment I'm out of the room," I answered back, arms crossed. He looked me over, then started to undo the buttons of his collar. A black tattoo encircled his neck. I had seen that design before, and knew what it was. "I'm on a leash. I can't harm anyone that isn't related to my job. There's been a ring of these types lately. They're selling humans to supernatural creatures for all sorts of reasons. I'm tracking down the sellers, not the products," he explained. "You were gonna eat me," I pointed out. "Self-defense. You attacked me first," he said with a smug look on his face. I hated dealing with monsters for this reason. An old friend of mine said all supernatural creatures would make great lawyers. They all knew how to twist their words, to give enough doubt to make their point seem valid. Nothing good ever came from talking with monsters, let alone trying to make a deal with them. Someone came inside the house. A woman stormed up the stairs looking for the troublesome creature she had the job of looking after. She was beautiful, but in a manufactured way. I bet it took her 2 hours each morning to get her makeup and hair just right. Through her rage, she didn't even notice the reason why we called her at first. "August, you better have a damn good reason for..." "Oh my God, what do you have?" She rushed over, hands out to take the boy from his arms. The monster refused for a moment, then carefully handed over the precious bundle. When his hands were free, his face dropped, and he made a distressed squeaking sound. "Who are you?" she asked, finally seeing the other person in the room. Innocent bystander?" I commented with a shrug. "Shit. Well, supernatural creatures are..." She started, and I waved her off. "I'm a retired contract worker. I know all about monsters and such. Is the kid gonna be okay?" She breathed a sigh of relief over not having to explain monsters to a normal person. "Yes. We'll get in contact with the family. If he comes from a bad environment, we'll find the right home for him. Here's my card if you want any kind of follow-up." "Did August attack you? You're bleeding." I rubbed my nose only then, realizing how bad I looked. I took the offered card, but knew I wanted to just put this all behind me. "I did no such thing. I'm on a leash," August, the monster, said with his arms crossed. "Oh, fuck off. We all know you're a little shit that causes problems," she growled back at him. "Self-defense," he added, with a smile that made me want to punch him. Don't worry about it. I'll leave you guys to your work. Just make sure the kid is taken care of." I went to leave, but the woman was nice enough to offer me a ride home. A few minutes later, I found myself in my small apartment, my body sore and my only good shirt ruined by blood. I collapsed into bed, never wanting to deal with supernatural creatures again. And I added door-to-door salesman to the list of jobs I refused to do. A few days later, I found myself staring at my phone. An email had come through, saying I was being paid for assisting in the job at that house. It was enough to cover my rent for one more month, but I was confused about why that monster would share the payment. Did his handler send me something because she felt bad I got dragged into the mess? Or was it August? I didn't know much about him, but he seemed like the type to not care about money. Giving it away was easier than thinking about how to spend it. I had other emails in my inbox. I quit hunting down monsters 2 years ago, but I still get the job requests from time to time. If I started back up again, I would only have to worry about my life, not my rent. I put my phone away, shaking my head. No matter what, I refused to go back to that life. Working in customer service was slightly less stressful. I found myself sitting on the floor of my apartment, wearing 3 layers of clothing while cutting out coupons for tonight's meal. Any money in the bank was put aside for my phone bill and rent. I didn't even have enough money for a loaf of bread. My work options had also dried up. Who would want to hire a guy with a resume like mine? For most of my adult life, I did a job where I couldn't be upfront with new employers. If I said I had been a monster hunter until 2 years ago, I would be kicked out of any interview. I found myself at a breaking point. I needed a job soon, or else I would be on the streets in a few weeks. Or starve to death, whichever came first. A ping came from my phone. I had been ignoring the emails for a while. Even though I stopped hunting monsters, the job offers were still emailed. I needed to face the hard facts. If I didn't accept a contract job, I wouldn't be around for much longer. Hunting monsters wasn't easy. Sure, some are pretty harmless to humans. Those kinds of assignments didn't pay much, but you had a better chance of walking away with your life. The problem is, it's hard to tell between the harmless creatures and the bloodthirsty ones. The dangerous creatures tended to randomly show up. I've heard of hunters in the middle of a job relocating pesky supernatural creatures, getting ambushed by something they didn't have the strength to deal with. Starve to death or get eaten by some sort of monster. What a choice my life had led me to. I finally caved and picked up my phone, scrolling through to see if any of the open requests were suited for me. I didn't have any weapons left over from my hunting days. I sold those first to stay afloat. If I didn't have such a massive debt, I might not have gone back to my old job. Almost all of the requests required a partner, or equipment that I didn't have. I spotted one that might be what I could handle. Some pale human creatures had been spotted in popular camping grounds. Some people had gone missing, with no traces of their bodies. I had heard of pale creatures made of mushrooms that imitate humans. Those were too risky to deal with. If you were touched by them, they'd infect you. But from what the job request listed, there was a good chance these weren't the mushroom creatures. So I had a chance. I sighed, wondering if I was going to come back alive after I sent an email accepting the job. I had really let myself go in the past 2 years. My old injuries didn't help. The cold made my knees and hips stiff. I did some stretching to get ready for what I had just committed to. Within the next few hours, I found myself at the start of a hiking trail, a heavy pack weighing down my steps. Since I didn't have any gear, I rented some. The corporation that sends out these requests is pretty generous. If the items aren't damaged, I can return the gear at the end of the job for no cost. But when it came to hunting monsters, you always ended up ruining your clothing and gear. Anything damaged would come out of my final pay. I rented a cheap axe for a weapon. It was tipped with silver, making it hit harder against creatures. Seeing someone with an axe in the woods wouldn't raise as many eyebrows as a sword or other weapons might. Most people think guns would be the best bet against monsters. Sadly, that's not the case. Magic doesn't stick very well to bullets and guns for some reason. It's easier to bless a sword to make it more effective against a monster. For the most part, bullets just piss them off. It's not impossible, though. I have heard of special bullets. The material to create them costs more than I've ever made in my lifetime. So, no guns to hunt down monsters in my future. I was given directions to the campsite that had been last attacked by the mystery creatures. My legs ached as I hiked, and I started to sweat under my heavy, borrowed coat. Going right into hiking after not being active for years was a mistake. I pressed on, wanting to get to the site before sunset. My pack had been filled with some snacks and canned goods for the trip. It was a pleasant surprise. When I stopped to eat a granola bar, I reflected on an important fact. I was lost. I didn't want to rely on my secret weapon so early on. It wouldn't get me out of the woods, but it may lead me to what creatures stalk the forest. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing. When I opened them again, the world was flooded with lights and colors normal people couldn't see. Humans shouldn't be aware of magic, let alone be able to see it. It was like how mantis shrimp could see color spectrums our eyes couldn't. Because I was pushing past human limits, looking at magic hurt like hell. Normally, I use this gift to focus on one creature to see how much power they held. Looking at the entire flow around me nearly split my head open. In a few seconds, I was forced to shut my eyes again, pushing down the one talent that made me useful when it came to monster hunting. Off in the distance, I had seen a batch of light. Every living thing had a tiny drop of magic in them. Supernatural creatures had far more than a drop. Since I saw a mass of light together, that meant the creatures I had been looking for were huddled at one spot. I bet that when the sun set, they would all leave the safety of their home to go hunting. I hurried off in that direction, praying I was going to face monsters on the weaker side. I pushed through the woods and off the trail. I considered using my sight again to double check I was heading in the right direction. Finally, I came across a small cliffside. If I wanted, I could climb the rough, rocky wall. I followed it until I saw an opening just large enough to crawl through. A cave was perfect for darkness-dwelling monsters to hide inside. I only had less than half an hour of sunlight left. These creatures would most likely be asleep. You may call me a coward for wanting to slaughter creatures in their sleep, but I didn't have the power to deal with a horde on even terms. I guessed it was a horde. The mass of magic I saw was either a lot of weaker creatures or one very strong one. If I came across just one, I doubted my axe could kill it, even while asleep. I left behind my borrowed pack. I only brought the axe and a water bottle attached to my hip. I double-checked that my phone was safe under layers of clothing. Even if I called for help, there wasn't a good chance anyone would show up on time. The corporation had the money and equipment for monster hunting, but not the manpower. And they always needed someone to hunt down monsters. I was on my own the moment I crawled inside. I debated on leaving. I would get paid a small amount for just locating a monster den. My dad hovered over my head, causing me to keep going forward. I used a small pen light to look around the enclosed space. My feet crushed small bones when I stood up. Once past the opening, the cave was large enough for a person to take 10 steps in any direction. There was another opening in the back that went even deeper. The layers of bones on the ground should have been enough to make me leave. I walked as quietly as possible, ducking down low through the other opening. The path caused me to hunch the entire way. I hated how loud my footsteps and breathing sounded in the small space. Finally, I came into a large open space. Drips of water echoed through the massive cave, and the sounds of breathing. I wished I hadn't walked into that place. It smelled of the dead and unwashed bodies. I carefully used my small flashlight to scan the area. The piles of what I had assumed to be bones moved. The white shapes stirred in the dark. A set of white glowing eyes appeared. Then another. I gripped the axe handle tightly in my hand for an attack. I thought I was ready. But one of the creatures suddenly sprang up and latched onto my back. I held back a scream as I slammed it against the wall, to hear a terrible crunching sound. I turned on my heel to bring down the axe on my attacker. Thankfully, the teeth and claws hadn't gotten past my coat. I heard more of the creatures in the dark. I swung my weapon in time to catch one in the head. To my horror, these creatures were nothing but bones formed together in the shape of an animal-like body. This wasn't good for me. It took a lot of magic to move the dead like this. I hacked away at the bones at my feet, crushing a few of them. With more of those creatures coming at me in the dark, I decided I needed to keep moving. My light scanned the cave, to show brief glimpses of the horrors it held. There were too many of these monsters. Teeth chattering in empty skulls. The clawed hands dug into the rough floor. Each sound echoed against the walls, making it hard to tell where they were coming from. The only way out soon became blocked by a mass of bones. I was scared. My heartbeat was so fast it overtook my hearing. I nearly dropped my axe when another creature jumped into the light and at my throat. No matter how many times I smashed them apart, the bones reformed, ready to attack me again. I risked using my sight. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the true terror that had been hidden in the darkness. A massive light sat at the back of the cave that had thin strings connecting it to all the other smaller balls of light. When I hit one of the creatures, they fed from the larger magic source to reform. That did use up some power, but it was so little that they could possibly reform thousands of times. I didn't get a good look at what monster was the source of the magic. I shook my head, turning off my sight, the throbbing pain forcing me against a wall. I was stupid to accept this job. I could say that 1,000 times, but it didn't change the fact that I was there. I needed to keep fighting until my body gave out. I dreaded becoming just another one of these creatures. But unless a miracle happened, that was my fate. I considered I just might get a miracle. I needed to stay alive until then. My axe came down again and again, the monsters not letting up their attacks. My arms got shredded from shallow cuts with those claws and teeth. My weapon soon felt too heavy for my arm to lift. My chest was on fire and my legs shook from fear. I focused on staying alive. Giving up meant dying. I had been through worse pain before and refused to let my body give out. Just as I almost lost hope, I was rewarded for my efforts. A burst of light tore through the cave, causing the creatures made of bones to scatter. The light died down and my eyes adjusted. My mouth dropped open when I finally saw what had been controlling all of the creatures inside the cave. The upper half of a massive human skeleton sat against the back wall of the cave. The eye sockets came to life with white light. The arms were so long, it reached to where I was on the other side of the cave. I rolled out of the way and towards the person who lit up the area. I did a double take. I never thought we would meet again. August? I sputtered out. He also did a double take. His wavy black hair tied back out of his face. He wore the same dress shirt and pressed pants I'd last seen him in, but this time was a bit dirtier than before. What a coincidence, he said with a dimpled smile. Since this was a job that had been sent to a few contract workers, I had hoped someone besides myself would accept it. Anyone but the person who showed up. I didn't know much about August. Only that he wasn't human and liked to eat brains. If I wasn't careful, his attention may turn in my direction. Your axe is too heavy. Use this. He tossed a small baseball bat in my direction. I dropped my axe to catch it. It appeared to be a wooden bat meant for a child. However, it was perfect for this situation. It was light, so much easier for my tired arms to swing. One of the bone creatures recovered from the burst of light. It dropped down from the ceiling, teeth out, ready to maul my face. I landed a hit to the skull, only to see the entire body explode to pieces. The bat I had been given had some sort of spell on it that poured magic into whatever it hit. If creatures absorb more magic than their bodies can handle, they die. Explode in some cases. You take out the smaller ones, I'll do the boss, August shouted, as he was already on all fours to race across the floor to the giant thread at the back of the cave. I decided splitting the pay for this job was better than being dead. I focused on smashing up the monsters around me once again. The only problem with the bat was it took 3 seconds to charge. I picked up my axe again in case I needed to use it when the bat ran out of power. I was so focused on the smaller creature, I didn't see when August suddenly sailed across the room to slam hard into a rock wall. So much for taking care of the boss. The large hand of the skeleton came down. I narrowly avoided getting crushed. I needed to see what kind of shape August was in. If he couldn't defeat the larger monster, we would be dead. I focused my sight on him for a moment, my head hurting so much I could see only one thing. His internal magic supply was low, and he had the same thread attached to him as the other monsters did. This creature was draining his powers. Because humans had such a small magic source, it went unnoticed by most creatures. This thing didn't bother trying to drain me of the tiny hint of power I held. My ace had been knocked aside. Aside from a new weapon, my situation hadn't changed from before. I desperately needed to think of a way to get out alive. As I knocked aside monsters with the lighter bat, my mind raced. The bat was useless against the larger skeleton. It simply didn't hold enough power to do damage to the creature. I didn't have the strength to defeat it with the axe. If only I had more magic to pump into this monster to defeat it. An idea came to me. One so simple I hated myself for not thinking of it sooner. I dodged another large hand trying to crush my insides. I then focused on only looking at the threads that connected the skeleton to the other monsters. I pushed my body to the limits, to race around grabbing hold of those threads. Holding pure magic hurts. You can safely pass through it, unaware it's even in the air. But if you can see it and know how to take hold of it, your body rejects it. Not even monsters can hold pure magic without some sort of pain. My hand felt like it was on fire as I collected more of the threads. Claws caught my legs as I ran. Everything hurt, and I was scared as hell. Dealing with creatures isn't easier over time. You're just as scared the 100th time as you were the first time. I acted fast to ensure that fear didn't take over. When the large hand came down again, I took my chance. I jumped on the long arm bones to run straight toward the skeleton. It tried to smack me off with the other hand. I rolled off to the hard ground, avoiding getting crushed by the heavy bones. It couldn't move its hands fast enough to stop me from running in front of the ribcage. With my left hand full of threads, I thrust it forward, pulling all the magic from the creatures connected to them. If you don't have good control of magic, it backfires. This is what I wanted. Without a purpose, the power on the other end of the threads came racing towards my hands. At the last second, I gave that power one simple order: go back where it came from. A bright light blocked my vision. My body was thrown back as all of the sound disappeared. I didn't think I was still alive for a long time. When I opened my eyes and lifted my head, I saw the damage I had created. Pieces of bone were scattered all over the cave. Not a single skull was still intact. I looked to my side to see the only other living thing in the cave. August sat up covered in white bone dust. He met my eyes and gave me a thumbs up. He didn't know what happened, only that the job was finished. "Do you want to come to my place to clean up?" he offered. No, I didn't. I hurt. A lot. I almost refused, but then considered he might have a bathtub instead of my dinky shower. "Only if you don't try to eat me," I said with a groan. "That was self-defense. You stabbed me," he replied with a shrug. We reported that the job had been finished. A cleanup crew would be by shortly, and payment was being arranged. Since 2 people took the job, they needed to know how to split the pay. I really needed the money, but I told them to split it in half. If August hadn't shown up, I would be dead. Since he wasn't human, he could create a doorway directly to his place. We walked out of the cave into a house I wasn't expecting to be as nice as it was. I didn't take in a lot of details. I was just directed to the bathroom to get all the blood and dust off. Everything stung, but that soon went away in the hot water. August knew I didn't have clean clothing, so he set some of his out for me to change into. He was slightly taller, but the sweater and sweatpants fit just fine. I went downstairs to ask him to get me close to home. As I walked, I tripped over a toy truck. I carefully put it aside so no one would trip on it again. Then I wondered, why would he even have something like this in the house? A terrible thought came to me as I entered the kitchen, to see him struggling to cook chicken nuggets. At the table sat a small person I hadn't seen since we first met. The small boy we found in the rundown house was coloring at the table, as if this was normal. I hissed at August, motioning for him to talk to me in the other room. "Why do you have him?" I half whispered. "I figured you already knew I did. Why else would I be exhausting myself on all these jobs?" he answered back. I looked him over. He appeared tired. From what I saw of him when we first met, he should have been able to defeat the skeleton that day. Now he looked like he was on his last legs. If he had just adopted a child, he would need money, and fast. No wonder he looked so awful. "Why would anyone trust you with him?" I asked. A very important question. "Well, that's an offensive question. One brain in front of someone, they just assume you're a monster," he added with a laugh. "You are one." His face fell. He looked a little angry that I spoke the truth. "You never told me your name," August said, ignoring what I just said. And it was true. I'd never bothered telling him when we met. I figured we would never see each other again. But he had let me clean up at his place, so I owed him an introduction. "Richmond," I said. "Now, Rich," August said, but I cut in. "Richmond," I sternly corrected. "Now, Richie," August carried on. "I'll admit I'm a monster, and so was the mother who sold her child for her next fix. His aunt and uncle have been contacted, but they're not ready to take in a child. I am currently the only person who wants him. I'm not saying that makes me a good person, or any less of a monster. I'm just saying he's safe with me, because I'm a very simple thing." I paused, considering his words before I asked him to explain. "What's that?" His face turned into another dimpled smile, one that held no malice behind it. "Someone who loves his son. I've accepted another leash, and I couldn't be happier. Now, stay for dinner." In the few months since I had seen him last, August had gone from a monster that was just used to solve supernatural problems to one that focused his power to take care of an unwanted child, for no other reason besides love. I think a few people would have thought I was crazy for believing him. If anyone saw the look in his eyes when he saw the boy at the table, though, they wouldn't doubt his devotion. I took over cooking dinner so August could help his foster son color. The boy didn't talk much, but I thought he was a good kid. It took a few tries for him to tell me his name. In the end, he scribbled Lucas with crayons on one of his drawings. When I told him my name, he started writing it repeatedly until dinner was ready. August didn't eat, so he packed some leftovers for me to take home. When I had accepted this job, I wasn't expecting the day to end like this. Lucas was sent to bed, and August offered to use my apartment door to get me directly back to my place. I refused, not trusting him with access to my apartment. I was dropped off at a bus stop a few blocks away instead. I got home so tired I could barely stand. I didn't show how much my hand hurt or how badly I'd been wounded in the fight at dinner time. August would have forced me to go see a doctor. I simply couldn't afford that. Better just to rest and sleep it off. As I put away the containers of leftover nuggets, I saw a drawing August had tucked away between them. I smiled, seeing the childish scribbles I assumed to be my face. Just before I passed out for the night, I checked my phone to see if the payment had been sent. A new contract had been added to my phone, one that just texted me to see if I got back home or died on the way. August must have gotten to my phone when I wasn't watching. I sent him a frowning emoji, hoping he understood how I disapproved of his invasion of my privacy. Contract work would be way easier with a second person, or monster, on my side. I curled up, quickly falling asleep that night, refusing to even consider asking for help ever again. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.